This is Creative Banter. Remember how I mentioned about a surprise of sorts 2 episodes back, and then swiftly ignored it? Well, in this episode, it's finally revealed, and it brings plenty of discussion to the table on what it means for the future of my art. Let's dive right into this, shall we?
Probably wasn't the wisest idea of me to grab a handful of honey roasted peanuts and eat those before this recording here.
No, not a good idea.
So if I start just coughing and choking, it's because of the remnants of those. So probably not a wise idea, probably not recommended, but we'll see how this goes.
Great. So Ben's just going to be dying in the background there and have to deal with that
Just
audio.
in my colorful spandex. Yeah.
Oh, great. I didn't need that visual again.
Yes. I got to bring that up. That's like the one thing I've got.
Yeah, that's the one thing every week that everyone has to be reminded of is Ben is wearing spandex now for his bike rides. Wonderful.
Yeah. And that was something that a couple episodes back you had teased something, and so I'm curious what that is.
Right. So quick reminder for those listening. When I was talking about, or the first episode that we did after I got back from Colorado, after we had our month-long break, whatever it ended up being, toward the end of it, I said that I had a little bit of a tease from something that had happened out in Colorado that I'm not quite sure how it's going to be received, but it's something that I think ultimately is good in the long term. And then I got lazy, didn't edit that episode until earlier this week, and so last week we recorded and continued on and just had a buffer, and I forgot to mention it. So nonetheless, I met up with Matt Payne on the way out of Colorado before he was going to his Colorado trail, and the primary reason why I met up with him was because I bought a camera off of him. I now have a Sony A7R II with a 70-200 f4 lens.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's your answer for the tease.
Well, I was picturing something. I don't know what I was picturing, but I was picturing something more colorful. Going back to the spandex there. That's cool. What was the motivation behind picking up the Sony?
So we've been talking, or I had been talking the past few weeks, few months, whatever it was. Really ever since my trip to Acadia, I've been debating whether I want to go digital or at least toy with going digital. Primarily because the cost of film keeps going up. The anxiety that I have around the entire process, or that I've begun to really have around the entire process, especially coming back from bigger trips like Acadia, like Colorado, and not knowing, despite my capabilities, if those photos are even going to turn out to begin with.
Yeah, because you had that one batch of film that did not turn out so well.
Yeah. So I wanted to try and see, okay, at first I was thinking I'll go with the Fuji medium format system, because that'll be just as slow as large format, as film. It'll give me all the goodness of medium format just in a digital body.
Yeah.
During Colorado, I was thinking a little bit more about this, and I'm like, there's a lot of limitations when it comes to lens availability on the GFX system, in terms especially with telephoto lenses, but just all around, their macro lens isn't truly a macro lens. It's it's 1:2 reproduction ratio instead of true 1:1. So you need an adapter or a extender, whatever you want to call it, in order to get it to 1:1. And I don't want to have to fluff about with that kind of stuff when it comes to lenses. I just want to have a lens that does what I want it to do, and that's that. So, and then I was also thinking, well, that's also a heavy system. And if I'm going to go digital, especially for the same price, why not go for something that's lighter, that isn't going to be so bad, hiking around, especially for longer hikes, backpacking, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about the Sony system, I know obviously you use it for your videos. I know Simon Baxter uses the A7 III for all of his work, or the A7R III rather. And Matt Payne, I know, uses it along with plenty of others, of course.
Yeah.
Start looking into the costs, and I knew that buying like a used A7R IV and a couple lenses would right about be what it would cost me for the Fuji setup that I wanted. But they also just recently came out with the A7R V.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you get into all that digital fun stuff of obsessing over new cameras and such. But I sent Matt a text, and I'm like, hey, is it worth the extra so-and-so much between the A7R IV and the A7R V? And we got into a little bit of a conversation, and he asked why I was asking, and I told him my thoughts. And he's like, well, I've got this A7R II sitting around and a bunch of lenses that I'd be willing to sell. And then he went on to say, I'm going to be in this one town that just so happens to be right off the road that I'd be traveling on going out of Colorado on the day that I'm going out of Colorado. And it just kind of seemed like...
It just kind of aligned.
Yeah. The stars aligned. Just it seemed like fate in that kind of sense, as weird as that is, like, just too good to be true. And for the price that he sold it to me for, I'm like, all right, like, not losing a ton of money here if something happens where I don't like it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, yeah. So met up with him, picked it up, and that's where that wonderful portrait of me that I posted on the Discord earlier had come from.
So it was Matt that took the out of focus picture of you.
Yeah. He was. I was showing him the Ricoh, and he was playing around with it and took the out of focus picture.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So now a little while back, I don't remember how long ago it was. Was it a Nikon digital setup, right? That you had for a little while, then ended up sending back. I can't remember what setup it was that you had for that little bit.
For those listening, when we first started this podcast, Ben and I recorded 2 episodes, I believe it was, that we decided to reserve as like pilot episodes.
Yeah.
And the first
they weren't
episode...
very good.
maybe I'll post them over at the Patreon one of these days. But yeah, we were talking in the very first one about film versus digital, and we were talking about our experiences with the each having gone over to digital away from film and seeing, like, toying with that idea, I guess you could say. And we had recorded that shortly after I had returned, sold back, whatever you want to call it, a Nikon D800, I think it was. It was a Nikon D800. Maybe it was like the Nikon D800E or something.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those. So it's kind of funny to have, what is it, a year and a half later, almost 2 years later, to be trying digital again.
So what's different this time around? Like what is the motive? I mean, certainly the Sony is a little smaller and lighter. I think they're basically about the same in terms of image quality, if I remember right, because I think they're the same general. They're pretty close to each other in that sense. But I'm curious how this experience will be different than the previous time when you decided it really wasn't as much for you.
I think there's 2 main factors here, and really it all just plays into my mindset going into it.
Mm-hmm.
As with anything else, it's amazing how much your mindset prior to doing something can sway it, whether it's something good or turns out to be something bad. So first of all, with this, when I went and got the Nikon, that was a year or so ago, my whole idea was that, okay, well, now that I'm shooting digital, I can kind of go along the same lines as what Brooks Jensen does with his Kokoro series, where you're making projects and project-based works, and then putting them together in a collection, like an ebook or something, and then presenting them online.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really been one for working in projects or working in big collections like that. I mean, the most project-oriented work that I've done really is the Coke Machine series that I'm slowly working towards, but at least the stuff that I've put out is like the Norts Resort kind of work. And that's just more so because it's an area that I frequent, and a lot of my work comes from there. So in terms of photographing a bunch of like subjects and putting together a project, that really led me to kind of stalemate with the Nikon. And then there came issues with it in terms of like trying to figure out what lenses to get and what lenses are going to be best, and the paradox of choice that comes along with that. And so I just wasn't in the right headspace for that. I went into it in a poor manner. And looking back now with how I'm treating the Sony instead, I tried treating the Nikon as, okay, I'm going to get the same lens, as the same focal length lens as I'm used to, with macro capabilities, or at least close.
Yeah.
And we're going to run with that. So I'm going to be doing the same exact thing as I had been doing with film, just digital. And the past few nights with Sony, I've been trying to figure out what lens I want to get to pair with the 70-200, or just to use without the 70-200, to kind of like put it on a shelf and forget about it. I was thinking today when I was out, maybe what I really need to do is just forget about that and start fresh. So what is my main purpose for going digital? And that's really the second thing that plays into this, is I wanted to start playing with digital more after having read Braiding Sweetgrass, especially after that, because I want to start seeing what kind of macro work I can do, what kind of small scene work I can do that, I could do with 4x5, but it would be more difficult.
Yeah, it's tough to do that with a large format.
Like I was playing around with a Ricoh, I want to say like a month and a half ago, something like that, just in the backyard, and there were little mushrooms scattered across the yard. And I was laying in the grass just photographing these mushrooms in the Ricoh's macro mode. And the entire time I came back and I'm like, I couldn't do this with 4x5.
Yeah, it's a completely different, 4x5, a large format stuff is just, it's not suited for that in terms of both just the logistics of it, but also it's a little tough to experiment sometimes with the large format. Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing. That's a really terrible way of explaining my thought process, but that's currently my thought process behind going digital with this. So just trying to figure out, experiment more with photography and figure out what I want to do moving forward with it.
Those were some of the thoughts that I had when I got the Sony set up back in late 2020, because I thought I would experiment a bit more with it. But as we talked about, I think it was even just in last week's episode, I found that I really wasn't doing that. And just the way that I work with large formats is kind of the way that I like working. And at that point, I might as well just end up shooting it on large format anyways. But that's also because for where I go, I'm going on these dedicated trips. I'm not shooting close to home.
Yeah.
And I think when shooting close to home, perhaps that is where there's more experimentation that one can do, which is probably more friendly for working with digital. And in last week's episode, we're talking about, because I was talking about the looking at the Fuji medium format system, just because, with Provia hard to come by and this and that. But I think it was the day after we recorded, I got a email notification from Adorama, because I had put in one of the little requests of whenever, Provia 8x10 is back in stock, let me know. It was like the day after we recorded. I got the alert. And so I went ahead and ordered a box because I was curious to see what the expiration date would be on it. And I think it was May 2025.
Okay. So they're still making it.
So it was really good to see that date. And I know Adorama is now out of it, but there's other places that still have it. So I might order a little bit more. But it was just funny because we were just talking about that. And then sure enough, it was just like, maybe even been that evening, I got the notification and I just Apple paid right away and got that box.
Yeah.
And so all the thought I had about having to at some point go to the Fuji medium format system, that has all just evaporated. It's gone. Now I'm just back in like, yay, film, it's still around. Just because I love that mentality of working with it. Now, for you with the digital kit now, do you think you're going to bring both setups into the field and try to use the digital for some things that you may have shot on film before, or are you going to keep them separate in that regard?
I have a feeling that this is going to be a complete replacement of film for me.
Really?
Yeah. Which is really weird to say after like 4 years and being so like gung-ho about film and all of that kind of deal. I know it's not like nearly as drastic of a shift as what it would be with you going digital after over a decade or two, whatever it's been at this point. But
yeah,
but still,
feels like it.
Yeah, but still, it's one of those things of like today. Like I said, I went out just to my local park just because I'm currently in the process of figuring out what lenses I want to have for the Sony that are going to do what I want them to for my plans moving forward, but perhaps aren't going to be too drastic of a change just yet. I'm not quite sure what direction I want to take it, but nonetheless, I went out because I wanted to see what the 70-200 was capable of for the small scenes that I normally photograph. So I was walking around this trail and was able to get 1 or 2 photographs like I normally would with a 4x5 pretty comfortably without much change. And then I looked off into the distance, and for a while I had been walking alongside these deer that were off into the woods a bit more, and they were just ahead of me. And then I look off in the distance and I see one just grazing there. So I take out the camera and I just start walking slowly up to it. And I wasn't able to get a photograph, but just that ability to handhold the camera, to be able to be at 200 millimeters and have the potential to take a portrait, essentially, of wildlife like I'd never been able to do before, like I'd never really had a ton of interest in before, but nonetheless, it was just really weird to experience and to actually be enjoying that.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that initial kind of learning a new tool, learning a new camera, which is always, that's the most fun part about the process. I mean, whether it's film, whether it's digital, whatever it is, learning the limits of the equipment, learning what it's capable of. And what I'll be curious about is, as you've had more of a chance to work with this, how satisfied you will be with the end result. Because I can only speak from my own experience, which is that I was never very satisfied with the digital work, just from the standpoint that I didn't feel like I worked hard enough for it. And I felt like it didn't have a sense of permanence. And it's really a tough thing to describe. I mean, if there's a particular scene, like for example, when I went on the backpacking trip this past spring, there was that scene I photographed with this cottonwood with these kind of rounded boulders in the foreground, a little bit of water meandering through them. And I ended up having pretty much ideal conditions that evening when taking that photo. I had good light, the wind cooperated, the foreground was clean enough. And I have that taken on 8x10 film. And I have a sense of satisfaction from that where I have no desire whatsoever to ever try to attempt to photograph that scene again, even if it ends up looking better. Like I can go there and there could be like rainbows and unicorns and lightning and northern lights. I don't know how that'll be possible because there's no sky in the photo, but it'll be possible. But I could see all that and I'll be like, yeah, I'm happy with what I got. And I don't think I would have that feeling with digital, just from the standpoint that it is easier to take a photo. And there's been times when I thought to myself, hey, if this scene looks better, I'll photograph it again. And I get there, I'm like, I just don't want to do this. What I did before, and actually that was on the spring trip as well, when I revisited that cactus with the fracture in the sandstone behind it. It didn't look quite as good, but at the same time I got there, I'm like, I do not want to set up my camera again. I don't want to go through all that. I'm happy with what I have, even though it may not be like a perfect photo. But I'll be very curious to see how that goes for you, since you shoot black and white. So you're gaining more control by starting with that color image that you can, adjust the tonality and such a little bit easier, and the way the colors respond with color filters and such. So I think it'll be perhaps a different experience for you, but it'll be very interesting to see how that pans out. And also, since large format is such a process oriented approach, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting experience, but I think you're probably going to end up back at film at some point. I'm going to put that out there right now because once you get used to that process, it's tough to give up. And to me, it feels like something's missing. But for you, it'll be different because you're shooting black and white, you're shooting different subjects, and perhaps having that added flexibility will be a good thing for what you're doing. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, it's going to be a major change regardless. I don't, and obviously it's way too early right now for me to say whether I'll go back to film or whether I'll stick it out.
Or some combination of some film for some things, some digital for other things.
I don't think it will ever be a combination just because I don't know. Something tells me it's going to be one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, that's been my approach as well.
Yeah.
For me, it's one or the other.
Like it would be one thing.
It's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah. It'd be one thing if I was shooting color and I wanted digital to be color and film to be black and white. Then I could kind of see having the two systems together. But given I'm all black and white and subject matter really isn't going to change much, the biggest driver for going digital is just being able to more easily capture those real intimate, tiny scenes. I plan on getting a macro lens, a true one-to-one macro lens, and really playing around with that and just seeing the world around me in a completely different manner. Because right now, as the 4x5 is set up, I can't get to one-to-one. So, and not to mention, it's very difficult to get the camera completely flat down into the angles that I want and everything to photograph mushrooms in that way or lichen or whatever. So yeah, it's a major change, but I think for the most part, it's going to be a good one. It's just a matter of figuring out some logistical things. I have some filters that are coming in from one that's being sent to me from Sarah Marino and a couple that are being sent to me from David Kingham.
So what kind of filters are they?
So Sarah is sending me a circular polarizer, and David is sending me a stack of, I believe they're ND filters.
Okay.
So, which is going to be, again, major change because the last filter that I've used for the past 4 years, or the only filter I've used for the past 4 years, intermittently, is a red filter. So I haven't touched circular polarizer or ND, though I've used them when I was first shooting. It's been maybe 5 or 6 years. So, but I think that they're necessary, especially the circular polarizer, just because they would have been nice to have when I first went up to Acadia for those water photos of the snails and the seaweed and that kind of stuff that I had talked about before.
Yeah. Plus, it's way easier to use that on a digital kit versus on large format. I mean, I very seldom ever use a polarizer in large format just because it's really hard to see what it's doing. And then you got to calculate for the darkness of the filter in your light meter. And it's just kind of an ordeal where I don't even think to use it versus, throwing it on a digital, spin it around while looking through the viewfinder and, hey, this looks good, click. Which makes it a lot easier to see how it works.
Exactly. So I figure I may as well have them.
And the other thing too, when it comes to at least my experience working with digital versus working with film, is that I am very forgiving of the imperfections when it comes to film. And I see it as just a part of the process. And this is something that I spoke about in one of the voiceovers on the final of my spring series of videos, where there was a scene that I photographed, and there's all these boulders in the foreground. There's this big cliff face in the background, and then there's some wildflowers that stick up. And there just really wasn't a way of getting it all in focus with large format. I mean, I could use some front tilt, and I get basically the foreground, I get much of the wall in the background, I get kind of the midground, but there's these other parts of the foreground that kind of drop away or a little further away from the camera that are not going to be in focus. And then the very top of the wall is not going to be in focus. So I have to pick and choose. And then the flowers stand on these really long stalks that stick up maybe about 3 feet or so. So the tops of the flowers are actually not within the depth of field. So they're kind of sticking above this wedge. And there's also a little bit of wind, so they're moving around a little bit anyways. But there was all these imperfections with it. But from the standpoint of shooting it on a large format, I look at that and I said, hey, I did the best I could. And some of this is simply just not really possible to get everything tack sharp, which is one of the things that makes me far more forgiving of certain things in a photo. And it becomes almost a little bit of part of the story of the photo. Seeing that sort of thing in terms of you can't quite get it all in focus, it is a little peek into the thought process of setting up that photo and just doing the best that I can. Versus with digital, if I don't quite get everything the way that I really want it to be, I see any sort of imperfection as a negative thing, whether it's like some color fringing in the corner or whether it's some weirdness where there's a lens that's slightly decentered and one side's a little soft, the other side's sharp. I would just regardless see that as a negative thing. And I think for me, one of the beauties of working with film is that, I mean, perfection doesn't exist. And shooting with film allows me to embrace that sense of imperfection and still be extremely satisfied with an image, regardless of whatever flaws are in it. But I never had that feeling when working with digital, because to me, it was just like, oh, this is something that needs to be fixed in Photoshop. And then things get a little bit more tricky in that regard. And so I guess with you working with the digital setup now, it'll be interesting to see how you approach that and whether it's, oh, it is what it is, I'm still very satisfied with it, or whether you kind of get into that mindset of, oh, I missed focus by just a little bit on this subject and just, it isn't quite what I wanted. I could do better next time. And to me, at least, that starts kind of going down this rabbit hole of trying to seek some degree of perfection in the work. And I'm just happy to avoid that entirely with film. But I'll be curious to see how you approach that and what your thoughts are with regard to that when working with the digital setup.
Yeah, I know already that I'll probably have to do, at least for some photos, some focus stacking and that kind of thing, just out of necessity, because I don't have the tilt or anything that I would with 4x5 to get foreground to background sharpness. But other than that, I really don't see much changing. Just because I'm still going to have the high standards. I've always had high standards for my work, even though it might not show because it's all trash, but that's a whole other thing. But I don't know. But it's tough to talk about, like, looking into the future of how things will be with this versus anything else, just because I've only gone out with it maybe twice now, and I haven't had enough time to really even get to know the camera and the system itself, get to know the lens and its capabilities compared to the years of experience that I've had with the 4x5 setup. So
now, do you think that you're going to feel like you're a bit of a part of the rat race of digital? I mean, it's not as though you're starting with the newest, shiniest camera. So it's kind of like buying a used car, where, if you buy a new car and then they come out with another one, 6 months later, you'll be like, oh man, I wish I had that. Versus, starting with a used car, you don't quite have that same sense of it. But to me, that was the other thing with digital, where there's always this, because you can see all those little differences, which even though I never felt like I was really a part of the rat race, it was still in the background where, the marketing teams do a good job just making you feel like whatever camera you have, whatever lens you have is somehow not good enough when something else comes out. And then buying into the mentality of, you have to have the best, most recent lenses and this and that. And I think that's the other thing with film, where for me, it's nice to sidestep that. And I'm also, I've had many 8x10s through the year, so maybe I haven't quite sidestepped that, but it's different because, you buy a camera more from a practical standpoint because you destroy one in Death Valley.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, stuff happens. But like when I bought the Chamonix that I have, it's because it was very lightweight and because it was very precise in a way that makes it possible for me to carry it a greater distance into places. So that's kind of the rationale behind buying camera stuff. The lenses I have, I mean, they were made probably in the 1990s. And so I have no desire for any new lenses. So it's just nice to sidestep that. But it'll also be interesting to see if you feel like you have that little tug of the rat race. Because I think there is a lot of pressure there.
I know that I won't have it when it comes to the cameras. The camera bodies themselves, I don't have it right now having the A7R2 versus the A7R4 or 5. Because like Matt would have sold me his A7R4, which could have had, 61 megapixels instead of the 42 or 47 that I have right now with this. Regardless, the 2 does everything I need it to, and it's perfectly fine. In a couple of years, I'll probably upgrade just out of more necessity of just camera batteries not lasting as long, the body being beat up, whatever. But then again, I'll just buy used, and I'll buy a generation or 2 behind from what it is and just keep going like that. So I don't foresee myself having any desire to have the latest and greatest camera body.
Yeah.
My problem more so comes in with lenses, and because at least with 4x5 with film, there are options out there, but there's really not a ton of options. It's not like you have primes versus zooms. Yeah. It's not like you have a ton of, it's more of like what is going to weigh less while still giving you a workable aperture range.
Yeah.
So my biggest issue is just what lenses do I want to get, and then just sticking with those maybe 3 lenses and saying forget it to the rest.
Yeah. So let's say that you've had the camera for a year and you find that it basically does everything that you need to and you're satisfied with it. Do you foresee yourself selling your 4x5 kit?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think I'll ever sell that. Like I specifically even got a different bag insert or camera insert bag, whatever you want to call it, for in my backpacking bag for this digital kit.
Yeah.
So that way I don't have to take and rearrange everything else for the film. All that stuff is going to stay tucked away. And if one day I get the desire to bring that back out and to work with it again, all I have to do is grab those 2 bags in the dark cloth and I'm ready to go. So I don't have any desire to sell it or to part off with it or whatever.
Well, that's good. That's good because that way at least you'll have the flexibility for if you feel inclined to bring it out and set it up and all that kind of setup.
And who knows, by the time this episode goes out in 2 weeks roughly from here, I could have sold the Sony and be back with 4x5 and touting the power of film.
Yeah. Well, this will be a grand experiment because I don't know. I mean, if of the many people that I know that have worked with large format, it can be very tempting to stray from it and say, oh, this digital setup will give me what I need. But it seems that so often people come back to it because there is something about the process of working with it. And I guess the only exception to that is I hear from people from time to time that worked with large format back in the day when that was just the only way of taking photos. And I don't know. Sometimes I get the feeling that they think that we view it the same way that they view it, where it's a nuisance, it's a hassle, it's a pain. And they're very happy to not be shooting film anymore. Versus I'm like, I love shooting film. I mean, it's I could work with a wide variety of cameras, and I choose to work with this. But I think that would be kind of the exception of people that have worked with large format in the past, and that, because oftentimes people, I think, feel that drawback to it. But it'll be interesting also when you go on an actual trip with it, and to see how many photos that you shoot now, and whether you are able to adhere to the way of working that you do now. If you want to, do you foresee yourself trying to work with the same mentality as working with film, or do you think you're just going to be doing a lot of experimenting?
Primarily working with the same mentality.
Yeah.
I already have plans of any time that I take a photograph, it's going to be on a tripod, for the most part at least. There will be exceptions when I experiment some here and there, but most of the time I'll be shooting on a tripod. I'll still be working through the photograph, just trying to get it in one photo, and same ordeal as with film. Trying to go in with that same mentality and not let the capability of, I have unlimited resources, unlimited space on this, or unlimited ability to photograph as much as I want, then why not do it?
Yeah.
I want to try and stay away from that, because I don't want to come home and be back into how it used to be when I was first starting out, where I'd come back from a weekend trip or even from a day trip and have 50 to 100 photographs to cull through and figure out how this one's slightly better than this one. Like, I don't want to go back to that. So
yeah, that's one of the things I do appreciate about the film mentality of working. Or in my case, I mean, I might have literally one photo of a subject. I'm like, cool, looks like I got it. There's no choices afterwards. There's no variations to deal with. It's just, I mean, if I shoot two photos of the same thing, it's always a hassle to just, stare at both of them on a light box, figure out which one is marginally better, and then try to keep track of that. So it's, I don't see how people do it if they come back from an area and have, 30, 40 photos of the exact same thing. I feel like I would just be like, I don't want to look at any of these. So I definitely think there's some merits to shooting less with that film style of that film mentality, really.
Yeah, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
For now, it's just taking it one step at a time and trying to figure out the logistics of it all. So,
yeah. So do you plan on dropping any other big bombs like in the next episode, or is that it for the year? Okay,
that should be it for the year.
Okay, so no colorful spandex or anything.
No, God, no. No, black and white spandex.
Yes. Oh, man. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.